I went to my first Code for America in Oakland. I'm not actually a member of Code for America, but you guys are cool, and I got a chance to go, so I went. I met a lot of interesting people, and I also met Janet, one of those interesting people who's Code for Dayton, Code for America for Dayton, and we started talking a lot about open data, because that's what I talked about in Oakland. And we said, you know, Code for America is starting to bump up these problems of obtaining data. And one of the problems is, you know, how do we get the data from government? And so we decided that this is probably something that you should be a little bit aware of, right? Both what's government like, but also, you know, what tools you have available to you, and maybe even so far as to affect policy or learning how to work with government to get the data that you need. So that's really kind of the inspiration here. And Jenna came up with 3 perspectives, right? One is the Brigade, the Brigade perspective. Like, I need data, but why can't I get it? Jim is over here.
Hello.
He's the representative, House of Representatives, and I think he's been kind of a proponent in working to get open data in Ohio. And then myself, I'm a professor at the John Glenn College of Public Affairs, and I do stuff with open data, information law, information management. So that's kind of a backdrop and what we seek to achieve. So, Janet.
Okay. So from the Brigade perspective, I never really thought about policy, or that seemed like a separate thing from what we were doing. And we were wanting to redeploy a court bot a couple of years ago. So that seemed like there's a repo, they've done it, we will just contact them, we'll get some code, and we'll do it locally. And that started us on our journey of learning that there are 88 counties in Ohio. There are how many jurisdictions, Jim? 200?
You mean different, like thousands? Is that what you mean? Like school districts and municipalities? Yeah.
Exactly. I couldn't figure out what it was. So anyway, as we went through the process, we realized that that was not a very efficient way to do this, and was there some other place to go? And it does turn out that all those jurisdictions turn in information to the state, which turns it into the feds. So there is a repository where all that lives, but you can't tap it directly. With the help of the then Attorney General and now Governor, we got an audience with the Bureau of Criminal Investigations after talking with Jim about is this a technical problem or is this a political problem, the access? And so we met with the head of the BCI and the person who does identification, the person who does expungement, and it does turn out that it is not a technical problem, it's a political problem. And they said to us at one point that it would be illegal for them to allow us to do a limited API just to get the information, to let a person pull their own information to see if they were ineligible. If you just do that basic step. So we realized that those things that were in place were things that could potentially be changed. I don't know how well you can hear me.
I can hear you. You're right in front of me, but that's about it.
I just told the BCI story.
Yeah. Okay.
And so that's when I got really interested in policy and what could possibly be done if you rewrote policy specifically to make something open. The fact that there are laws already there doesn't necessarily mean that they are going to stay there forever, and we could potentially be part of changing that. Jim, you want to talk about your perspective on trying to do policy around technology as a legislator, please?
Sure. So I've been a state representative for a long time. So this was 8 years ago. And can you guys hear me all right?
Yeah.
Okay, good. So I wanted to do it. I had an idea to do a bill that would let citizens go online and be able to look at their jurisdictions. As Janet said, there's lots of different jurisdictions, and specifically to compare apples to apples. So you're comparing with like jurisdictions on, you know, what are they spending their money on, how much do they raise, you know, what are their tax rates, what are their results for the money that the taxpayer money that they spend, and that way you could really get a good idea of where your jurisdiction stacks up against like jurisdictions. Just something really easy like that. And then I had a different approach where a lot of people don't go online necessarily and go searching out data. and that's more active transparency, where somebody actively has to go out and look for it, which is a very small percentage of people out there. But passive transparency is where you just get the result. It gets put right in front of you. One of the best examples of that would simply be a receipt that you get whenever you buy something. You get a receipt. You don't have to ask for it. You don't have to go looking for what the prices are, something like that. You automatically get that data given to you. So this idea that I had would have those two different components. And I found in researching after I drafted the bill and hearing about all these problems that nobody, the auditor, state auditor, all these jurisdictions were saying, we can't do this. It's not going to happen because it's not the way we report data. So you're not going to be able to get the data that you could then compare to like jurisdictions. So I went and especially I talked to my jurisdictions in my house district, various municipalities and school districts. And sure enough, some of them, would do it online through a data entry type of web portal. Some of them would do it on Excel. Some of them would send PDFs. Some of them would actually do handwritten reports for what they're spending their money on and then mail them in. So that was the case. That's the case all around Ohio. And that led me into, well, you can't have good data where you can have good comparisons to inform the public about how we're spending money and how well we're doing on our programs until you first streamline how data is reported and entered by the different jurisdictions. So you talk to the jurisdictions, and say, well, okay, we're going to have this uniform system. So everyone's reporting in the same manner, both the means of reporting and also the categorization of, well, what is a public safety expense? What expenses in one jurisdiction will count, now for that, and others would count it as transportation, for example. So you have to have the categorization uniform as well. And trying to get everybody on board, all of our thousands of jurisdictions in Ohio, so that they would all report in the same manner and with the same categories, is a huge burden on them. They claim. In order to train to get trained, to get the software and actually, I guess the web portal. So this is going to cost millions or tens of millions of dollars. We can't possibly do it. We're going to have to hire 3 more people, in every single jurisdiction. So you're going to have to appropriate hundreds of millions of dollars in order to do this. And you'll never, save enough or get enough efficiency, so you shouldn't do this. And so that's how government typically works, is we don't want to change. Here's a bunch of reasons why we can't change. And then it doesn't happen because everybody that's in the legislature then gets worried about that. And they hear from their own jurisdictions. So this is something that we've since then, so for over the past 8 years, we've been trying to work on. Former representatives Mike Duffy and Christina Hagan were also big proponents of this, and they had a bill that would start that process just on a uniform system of reporting. And so that's kind of one of the first steps. The auditor, now Attorney General Dave Yost, was really a proponent of this as well. And now Keith Faber just took over as state auditor. So we'll have to see how much he pushes for it, but it's something that would be right up his alley, because he definitely wants to have everybody be accountable to the people. So that's kind of where we stand, and that's where I got a real education on data as a policymaker, and how important it is if you want to be able to effectuate a policy and really make a difference. And what I wanted to do is just have governments be accountable to the people, and have them be incentivized by the pressure from the people to just do a good job for what we want them to do, whatever that might be. So we're still working on it, and as with many things with different legislation, doesn't matter what it is, it oftentimes takes a long time, several sessions. Sessions are 2 years long, as you kind of break down those barriers and those objections to whatever you're trying to accomplish.
So, David Lansbergen, and again, I'm seeing, I've sat in a couple of these sessions now, and a lot of different threads are starting to come together for this presentation. One is, you're bumping up, you want to get the data, but why can't you get the data? And as Janet's example showed, is it really a technical problem, or is it a legal problem? Is it a managerial problem? Is it a funding problem? And now, as Jim's talking, this is opening up to be a real ball of wax, right? It's a cumbersome situation, and you don't know who's telling the truth or how you can, what you can do about it. So this session is really to kind of start to open up the discussion about this, so we can begin to not only work within the system, but also work around the system to try to make data more available. Not only for yourselves, but the general public as well. And so what I'm doing is I'm going to provide a little bit of a perspective here, and talk a little bit about the policy, but then only for about 5 minutes or so, because we really would like to have your questions. The ultimate outcome for this session, I believe, is to stimulate more discussion, like this is something we ought to know a little bit more about. For example, in the last session, you know, how do we talk to these government representatives, right? I didn't get any introduction to these representatives. They don't even know who Code for America is. Why are they asking? They're asking, why are you asking me for the data? This is now the interface that we're talking about, and we need to peel that back, and we need to work with legislators like Jim Butler to really try to put into effect better legislation, but also better policy, better management. So that's kind of the overview and the goals here. Okay, so the Freedom of Information Act, generically speaking, there's all different names for it, but basically it says citizens-owned public information. It's your information. It does not belong to the government. So you have to have that kind of an attitude, right? Unless some of those exemptions apply, it's your information, and you just have to figure out how to get it, right? And basically, I'm trained as a lawyer too, but basically the language says we really mean it, okay? That's a joke, folks. We really mean it because we're going to fine people, public servants themselves, personally, if they don't give the information if they should have, right? If there's any doubt about whether the information is public or not, err on the side of giving it. And there's more provisions in this kind of legislation to say it's yours and we're really going to work hard to get it. Now the question is, well, why is it so hard to get data? Why is it so hard to get information if there's this incredible erring on the side of opening up government? And we can talk about that in the next slide, right? And then along comes open data. This has been around since Watergate, right? Now along comes open data, and all this time we're trying to use technology to get the data out there, but open data, putting it on a portal, making it available for you to click it, and it downloads, shows up, right? And part of it is, you know, all these information requests, right? Just put it on the open data portal, and you can download it 24/7, no phones ringing, right? No paperwork exchange. So it's too costly to, and many cities now and states start to put it on a portal. But they also recognize the extreme value of this data, right? Because it's all collected at public expense, it's free, and it's an incredible resource that people can use. So it's the stuff that you do, but it's business people, it's citizens who are interested in whatever movement they have. So now we have data, and then now more recently we have new things like a data collaborative, right? And so a data collaborative says it's not just the information that you're making available, but you got to make sense of it, right? And so all this discussion I'm hearing in some of these sessions that you ought to work with civic organizations who want to make change, they have a problem, right? And they need help in making sense of it, right? In wrangling the data. So they might be proponents for better biking or cleaning up the streets, right? We can vote, you know, we can have petitions, but the real way to do it is through data. And so it's not only the data, but looking forward into the future, it's making sense of it. And that's where I see you folks moving in, right? You're gonna, not only in government now, you're starting to think about working with other partners within the ecosystem, and it's the analytics of it, right? It could be simple visualization, but it could also be like, what's behind those numbers? Why are they like that? Okay, so that's your short course of information. Okay, but the point here is that it's yours. And we really mean it, right? Now I'll talk about, real quick, what some of the problems have been. And this is just a short list, right? And this is kind of the working within the system and working without. One is, there's insufficient funding for agencies to do this. These are unfunded mandates on bureaucrats to provide data. If they're not judged for their job success by how well they fulfill information requests, what do you think they're going to do? They're going to do something else, right? And if there's no explicit thing in the budget that says, here's the amount of money that you have to do, and this is what you need to do, now you have goals and objectives that you can be measured against. So there's insufficient funding of agencies, not direct lines, but this is general, right? But there's no general funding, no general budget that says this is what you ought to do. Maybe this is something we can argue for. Another thing is courts do not sufficiently enforce it. Okay? In Ohio, we use a reasonableness standard, right? We give agency a reasonable amount of time. What the heck does that mean, right? Okay. But, at some points deal with this legal standard all the time, reasonableness, but they recognize that agencies don't have enough money. Courts recognize they don't have enough technology, but they really shouldn't be action enforcing institution to say, that's the law, that's what you need to provide. But instead, they take mercy on agencies, don't push them too hard. And so the courts have gotten more and more lenient over time. They've riddled the law with exceptions. The legislature has as well. So that's, that's one problem there. And then we'll just say political and cultural resistance to FOIA. Okay? There's obviously the political, right? People don't want to show themselves, right? Political appointees oftentimes are heads of these agencies, and they don't want data to get out, okay, despite what the law says. Even well-meaning government professionals also don't necessarily want the data out. But there's, as April said earlier, they get shat on a lot, right? But they're facing some, they really want to get the information out there, but they've got all these other things that they've got to contend with. Bottom line, work with them. Let's try to find a way to get that data, right? And we can talk about all the ways you could do this later on. Again, we're just trying to initiate an idea in your mind that this is something worth pursuing. And then obviously so resistance is there, right? It's also extremely expensive to find and obtain information. A lot of this stuff is handcrafted. No algorithms, handcrafted. And so what does that mean? It's gonna cost a lot of money. It's gonna take a long time. And so, I don't know, maybe there's some role there for Code for America that you can come up with, right? For example, lots of times these systems, the enterprise systems that they develop, they do not have functionality built into them to provide open data. And so what ends up happening, you've got these creaky little add-ons that really don't work, right? So there's also another technological solution there. Finally, the dirty little secret is, a lot of this data is really poor quality. Okay? And so why would I want to show my data and give you a hint about how poorly it's managed? Maybe even more, if I show you how poor this quality information is, maybe I'm telling you that I don't actually use that information at all to make decisions. Maybe, I don't know. So, but I've also heard of, community crowdsourcing where people go in and they help clean up the data, right? So there are solutions around this, right? There's solutions within working with government and solutions working without. And that's, those are some of them. But it is a complex situation. You guys are just scratching your surface. I don't know if you want to go into this complex situation. But if you want to get the data, that's what we're going to have to do. We're going to have to encounter this thing, and it's changing the culture, right? Right. This legislation, I worked with Mike Duffy before on this legislation. We did interviews. We did a whole survey of Ohio. I also did a survey of national governments. There's a lot of bogus reasons, but also good reasons why this is the case. Bogus reasons, it's against the law. I mean, that's a good one, right? That'll freeze somebody in their tracks right away. But you do studies about what actually the law prohibits, and it's really not that big of a deal. Or the technical is not that hard. It's the human thing, right? So we have problems with technology here. The human thing is much worse, right? But if you want to go in there, it's going to be necessary in order to really work with open data or data itself. So I'm going
to speak some more to exceptions. This takes us back to the BCI story. I think we have to talk because, sorry, I'm 80% there. So when we went to BCI and they said it was illegal, we also realized that the history of the fee structures that are in place at that agency. So in the beginning, when people would go to get their records, there was a real transaction cost because people had to look it up and photocopy it, put it in the mail, and now that revenue's in there, they are dependent on that revenue stream, and also on licensing access to companies that provide background checks. So, can you speak some to that, Jim?
So, I couldn't hear you earlier, Janet, in terms of, if you already said this, so I apologize if I'm repeating. But yeah, the issue for BCI is because everything is computerized now, you would think, and this is, I went to them, I actually went to and visited them in person, and wanted to know, well, hey, you have this data, it's right there. We should be able to, query that electronically, and it shouldn't cost you anything. Like that, that's your system right now. And with with the proper variables like a person's social security number, name, driver's license, whatever, and you should be able to query the system and get back a result as to where they stand. I mean, this can be for many different things, such as knowing whether, one of the things actually was if somebody has a violent animal at their property. And so they're coming up and they're on their computer and they're trying to put that in. There's different databases out there. I mean, this isn't just BCI, but different databases out there. In this case, animal control, where you're able to just put in one thing and then query it and then get back a response like, okay, I'm going for a domestic violence call at this house. There actually are two, dangerous dogs in the property. That's something that first responders would certainly want to know. So that type of assumption on my part, I think on most people's part, is always there. If you have a system, it can be queried, and certainly any system you would think at least you'd be able to query by name or social security number. But when we were trying to do this with BCI, they said, well, we only query by fingerprints. And this was actually something where we were hoping to be able to have background checks for people who are applying for professional licenses, and so it would automatically happen. And they said, well, if you did that, then everybody would have to be fingerprinted, and that's what would cost a lot of money, because we query by fingerprints, and your system is electronic, and you guys are the experts in in computers. You would think that you would actually be able to use something other than fingerprints to look at the system to see whether the person has something in their background where they shouldn't have a professional license. But they swore up and down that that's the case, and there's no way to just have the background checks done. Until later in the conversation, we got to, well, is there really no way to do it? And they said, well, if there were to be some type of a $5 fee every time, then maybe we could figure it out with some type of additional component to the system. It was just more of a negotiation of how do we make money off of this public data, which really, obviously, it's a public safety issue. So it's something that we should have been able to get, again, quite easily. And that's really the case for all data, both in that type of a situation where you want to be able to query something. And that actually even brings us to, now in terms of public safety, doing background checks, on somebody. If that data is out there and there's a system to do a query, you'd want to have that open so that somebody could query based on your driver's license or social security number. So that type of roadblock is one that's more in government, something that's you don't know whether it's really there or not, because you don't know the bureaucracy well enough, and only the bureaucrats do. So when you're trying to change something, and they, oftentimes they'll say we can't possibly do that, when they might be probably exaggerating in many instances, because they just simply don't want to do that. And that's been my experience, not just with BCI in this case, potentially, but even with Bureau of Workers' Compensation, for how do they calculate businesses' workers' comp premiums. And they said, well, this is, and I wanted them to provide a transparent formula for here's how your workers' comp premiums were calculated, and then send that out every 6 months. That's that active transparency. So every business would actually see, hey, my workers' comp premiums doubled last month, or last 6 months. And I don't know why. You'd be able to just look at the formula, but then workers' comp went nuts and said, no, we can't possibly do that. It's going to be, 25 pieces of paper we'd have to mail out to somebody. There's always these bureaucratic institutional roadblocks. And in the era of term limits, we have term limits in Ohio, they especially think, well, I'll just wait you out because it'll take you so long. Eventually you'll be gone, and somebody, they don't have to worry about it. So, bureaucrats are there for a lot longer than we are, at least in states that have term limits like Ohio. So those are always the challenges. From a strategy standpoint, if there is data out there and you can say, make the data available and then let the private citizens out there come up with a way to access it and use it and mold it and, and kind of open source the data, and then look at just anybody who wants to take the data and mold it into something useful. That's always going to be the best case. And having the government come up with some system that somebody can use, it's going to cost, it really literally will cost tens of millions of dollars for somebody to actually develop this system. And and in case anybody's wondering that does coding, of course you guys all do. You're not going to be getting that contract. That's oftentimes, and there's actually been some reporting in the Columbus Dispatch about this, that goes to the buddies of some connected politician. They're the ones that get there's literally a $42 million professional licensure web-based system. It's pretty rudimentary in terms of you inputting your data to apply for a professional license or to get a renewal. And I'm sure it's even more, but it was $42 million for a new system for professional licensing. So I don't know about you guys, but I bet you guys would be able to create that for much less. And that would be still a nice return. But that's oftentimes the case with government, and trying to fix the procurement system so that $42 million doesn't happen and you get a good product is really difficult to make the government come up with a system. It's far easier to just to pass a law that says, all right, we're going to just release our data, and it's not going to be useful to the public, but then somebody else can take the data and turn it into a useful product that the public can use. And that's obviously now with all the online communities out there. It's something that happens in every aspect of our lives, and very readily, and oftentimes for even for free if somebody just wants to, as a project, wants to get it done, or at least for an affordable amount of money. It's something that's done all the time, but that approach to having government work better is probably a lot more likely, number one, to pass, and number two, to work, because it's hard to argue that we should hide this data, depending on what the data is. We're just releasing the data. We're not having some big expensive program. We're not doing any of that stuff. We're just saying this is public, and it's not public, and you have to request it, and it takes forever to get, and it's not in the right format. I mean, this is actively online somewhere that somebody can just go grab anytime they want, and then use, and create something that's then useful for various aspects of our lives. So that's more likely to pass because it's hard to argue that you shouldn't do that, and then more likely to work because there will be various applications that will be created by the public in order to use that data. So to me, that's the best strategy going forward legislatively, is just shame your elected officials into, hey, this is our data, this is public data. We're paying all your salaries out there. We're the voters, we're the citizens, and you should just make this data available, and give me a good reason why you shouldn't do that, and then take it from there. That's more likely to actually happen versus creating a system on the government side.
So we have about 15 or so minutes. I can allow
Are we
that.
till quarter after?
Quarter after, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, we have a wrap up too. So, what are your questions? Yeah.
When you say leave the data open, what kind of data? How would they leave the data? Is it just CSV files? Like, what parameters would you be putting around them whenever you're saying, like, make it open? Like, what does that mean?
So it's hard to hear, but I think your question is, what do I mean by how to make it open? What does that mean?
Like, what's the format? How would we access it? That sort of stuff.
Well, you want it to be, this is more your area of expertise, but it's machine readable, so you don't have to go re-enter data in any way. So it has to be at least in that format. And a good example, you said what type of data, how would it be released? Well, obviously there's certain things you'd want to make sure you didn't do, like you want to have, there's privacy concerns, for example, out there. So you want to maintain at least those protections, but there's lots of ways to do that. So I do a lot of healthcare policy, and this a good example for healthcare price transparency. They have the all claims payer database, so you could actually put that out for Medicaid, where you're seeing exactly what everybody out there is getting paid, which the providers are getting paid by Medicaid for all these different, all these different services. You put that in a machine readable format and just release it. It's not going to be useful in and of itself, the data, but somebody could come along, either a company that wants to, change the data and then sell it to, for whatever reason, or if you want to really examine if there's any fraud going on, or just looking at performance, to make sure that people are getting good health care. Those are all things that you could do if you have just that claims data. And any other time that you collect data. So, we actually keep track of, and other states do as well, people, because obviously a government program like Medicaid or workers' comp, how often do people go and get their preventative healthcare visits, which we want to encourage, that, and looking at that data and changes over time, which again, you don't really have to have the government do the analysis. You just have to release the data on a regular basis, and there's so much interest in that out there that you'll actually get a lot of the analysis done from the private sector instead of from the government, who should also be doing it, but they don't usually do it.
So to partly answer your question, this goes all to the standards question, and more importantly, the metadata. So this is where government agencies need a lot of help in defining what those standards are. What would be the useful parameters or data descriptions about the data that you would find useful as a user? And I think there might be somebody here from Sunlight, I don't know. But if you look at the Sunlight Foundation, they have lots and lots of good policies about who gets to request it, who says what data should be made open. There's a lot of these important questions, and you can get in on that. But the answer you're talking about is obviously the metadata and the standards. And yeah, is it CSV versus Excel? CSV, obviously, right? But they need to work with that. But you need to work with them on that.
This is actually similar to this question, but I'm in Louisville, Kentucky, and we have a pretty nice open data portal. And we have an open data officer that works for the government, and at great expense to him, he's expended a lot of political capital to get people to open data sets. But one of the problems that I run into as like a citizen is like, I'll get the data and I'm like, this data sucks. There's a lot of problems with it. There's a lot of missing information. A lot of it seems wrong. I don't have any metadata. So the conversations around like going back to these partners inside the government who at political expense to them have opened this data, and then going back and being like, hey, can you fix this thing that you send us? Like, how, do you have any advice around that?
Yeah. I mean, this is again the crowdsourcing, right? You work with them. You can do analysis about why certain data is missing, right? You can go with them and say, what quality of data do you need on multiple dimensions? You need to work with them because they don't know. They assume that they have to be 100% accurate if it's a lawyer talking, right? And they'll never release it. Right? That's their mindset. Those are the people who are the gatekeepers. So you need to work with them on that. And I think a crowdsourcing solution really makes a lot of sense. People can go on and spot, if it's their neighborhood, they can say that that is erroneous and let me make a suggested change. Yeah.
I talked to Corporate America about like the Clear My Record law, like policy-wise, and one of the things that I got out of that conversation was in the policy, put the intent, but do not put like the software specifications or anything like that.
Yeah.
I'm curious, like with do you go into that at all, or you just sort of have to have the policy reflect the intent, and then you need to have the agency sign?
It's better to have the policy because it takes more time to develop the policy and have it approved. You don't want to have to go through that policy cycle every time you make a small little technical change because the technology has changed. So you refer to guiding documents that don't require that they're more technical in nature. That's the way it speeds things up. That's a good observation.
So I have a question that's both for like municipalities looking to, and other government agencies looking to make data open, but also for folks like Brigades, which is around like legislative policy versus guiding policy. Obviously, a lot of this is like has life when it's made when it's legislated.
Right.
But to wait for that to happen can be so long and arduous and can end up taking so much away from what we actually
Right.
do. Where do you see the balance between those two things?
Yeah, I mean, if you get an executive order, the mayor's in there, he says, this is what you're gonna do. You get a good administration, but in the meantime, you work through the legislative process, and then, like you say, it's gonna take a longer time to do. You build political capital, you have some good success stories about why that data made a difference. You get some nonprofits to be behind you to say, hey, this really made a difference in our ability to do the work that we need to do. So yeah, you operate a parallel track, I think. I don't know.
I don't think you can take it.
Oh, okay. Yes.
My name's Matt. I'm with Code for Boston. I also work for a regional planning agency called the Metropolitan Area Planning Council, and I spend most of my days on data portals and working with municipalities in the Boston metro region. And I think one of the biggest gaps I've noticed is talent. Or human resources. It feels like working with a lot of governments, they just simply don't have folks who are either literate in concepts. Like the difference between walking into the town of Medford and Google, which is like, down the street, is very different. And so I'm just curious, policy-wise, how do we deal with, I guess, either upskilling employees or trying to recruit the right talent into organizations to help build this data culture?
Yeah, I think the culture is the big thing, right? But when I did my survey of Ohio, they were talking about the same things that Jim was talking about, Representative Butler was talking about. It's going to cost this many people, this amount of time. But if you put a CSV file on a website, or you have a GIS system already, which already has functionality, you're doing open data, right? And then to the degree that there's a skills question, there's regional solutions. Right? So I'm very interested in regional solutions, how cities are doing that, spreading the talent, spreading the experience. So, and the money, it doesn't really take a lot of money to put a CSV file online, right? But then there's a maturity model, right? Then you start to realize you need to have a data dictionary with that, or metadata along with that, right? But that could be educated. But I think that's where the state can really play a difference here in providing that infrastructure. In Central Ohio, we're trying to do that right now for our local governments, right? We're creating a data toolkit. So I think there's a regional solution here. Yeah. So what do you guys think? I mean, where does this make sense to you for Code for America? I mean, these are all interesting facts, but how does it affect you and what Code for America should do? Yeah, Tim?
I don't know about overall Code for America strategy. So maybe there's another question, but it feels like, what do you do when your city has laws about what they should put in their open data portal and they're out of compliance? So is it time to sue? Or is that a guiding principle thing, or guiding legislation things guiding policies?
Yeah, I'm talking too much. Jim, did you hear that question?
I didn't.
Okay, the question is if a city already has legislation on its books about how it's going to provide data, but it just doesn't comply with that, what does Code for America do then? Do they go into an adversary approach? Do they work with them? What do they do?
So if the jurisdiction itself has a law that says they're supposed to produce data in a certain way, but they're not doing it, that's the question? So you the law is correct, but they're not carrying out the law?
Yeah.
Is that right? Okay. Well, typically you start off by just calling them and saying, hey, how come you're not doing it? If they just refuse to do it, then you can escalate it. You can talk to your state representative or state senator who's going to have a relationship with them, the state auditor. I mean, you kind of just keep going higher and higher up. You obviously can always talk to a lawyer about things. And that's another, obviously any government has to follow the law just like everybody else. And there's ways to make that happen on the judicial side. But that's expensive. You got to, hire an attorney. But the first thing I would do is just talk to them. And then second is talk to other people that could talk to them. And oftentimes that's enough. If all else fails, then you can, from a state perspective, we don't really like to interfere with, especially municipalities, if they have their own local kind of approach. But when it comes to uniform data, if you want to compare, like I was saying earlier, oftentimes it's going to be, hey, this is the state policy. So, your law is going, it doesn't count now. You have to adhere to the state standard. And that's also not going to work unless you have something tied to not performing to the state standard, like you get less funding, your city gets less funding if you don't perform. So that you really need those two things to get them to actually do it.
Yeah, so part of the talk today was to say, that these bureaucrats oftentimes get pounded on unnecessarily because of political appointees or funding or whatever. So work with them. Maybe they can't explain why they can do it. Maybe you have a solution, a compromise. But at some point, you gotta get adversary, right? And so open data is there willingly putting that data, but you also have FOIA and open records in Ohio to say, I want the data, right? I want the whole database. I want the whole database. Take out the privileged information. I will make sense of it. I have my USB key here, right? And the other thing to recognize is no one's going to be against transparency or open data. No one's going to say that, right? So you got to use that tool, right? You got to use that tool to say, are you against transparency, right? Why won't you give me the data? Is there something you're hiding, right? There's subtle ways that they hide that, but that's a very useful tool as well.
I think given the problem of it being a non-trivial amount of computer literacy to start to be able to do any hygiene on data in the first place, let alone the lack of standardization and training of people producing that information. I think, given just that one example where you have input records and the categorizations are slightly off, I think artificial intelligence is very capable of coming in these specific areas. To use that example, there's a model called word to vet, which then can say if the categorization is a word, but the word is usually interchangeable with that other word, then we can start to assign, these are 80-90% probabilities that this is what was meant. And providing that to somebody who says, hey, could you clean up the data now that it's assisted by these types of systems that are able to process the data, and identify why it's not clean, and start to repair that.
Yeah. Right, yeah, I mean, we talk about the standards, right? In Ohio, you can have at least 3 different accounting approaches to your municipal financial data, right? So you say, how are we ever going to compare apples to oranges, which is what Jim was talking about. But how much do they actually differ, and on what dimensions, right? So that's an empirical question and a technical question rather than, oh, well, it's not 100% aligned, so therefore we can't use it, right? But AI together with understanding the data itself, you can do apples to apples.
So I think he's got to go in about 7 minutes.
Okay.
I mean, we can stay later, but.
Okay.
So we're hitting our takeaways.
Yeah, where are our takeaways? We need one more takeaway that somebody can volunteer.
No, I mean our.
Oh, our takeaways. I'm asking for that.
We didn't practice this, can we talk?
That's okay, spontaneous is okay.
I'll go very so you can hear me, Jim. Our 3 takeaways were all public government data exists because of policy. Policy is not immutable. And CFA Brigade members can play an important role in helping craft and amend public policy related to data and technology. I was hoping you could speak to the getting to know your local representative.
The best, and I'm often asked this question, and really it's an important one, which is, well, how do I have an impact with my local elected official, whoever it is, whether it's on the city or township side or state side or federal side. And I think for everybody, the answer is the same, and that's the face-to-face meeting. Call them up and or schedule a meeting and say, I want to talk to you. I'm a constituent and about XYZ. And then just have that face-to-face meeting with them. That's by orders of magnitude higher in terms of effectiveness than even a handwritten letter, which is still really good, and you'll get a response. But it's far better to meet with somebody. If it's somebody in Congress, as they have a lot more people that they represent, you might be talking to a staffer. But even then, after you talk to the staffer, say, no, I want to talk to the congressman, and just don't be afraid to ask for that, because they work for you. And if they don't remember that, then they might not work for you very much longer, if that's their attitude, because that does get out. So, but most people are really accessible, and you just need to ask. The thing that works least well is any type of form letter, via email. Obviously those are easy to send. You can send a lot of them, but they're likely never even going to know how many form emails they received on a particular subject. So that really doesn't make a difference. It's the personal interaction works the best in terms of how do you affect change. But in terms of for you guys in particular, one thing that's rare among elected officials is any type of technological know-how. It's not very common in the public. It's especially not common, I think, in government. I think that was a prior question too. You have people who've been doing the same job for 20 years. They always do it the same way. They don't like change, but especially they might just not know in terms of talent. They might not be able to change. And so they might not have that aptitude. So it really helps us as elected officials to hear from you about this issue, because it's one where there's a dearth of knowledge and within government, even where you think it would exist, it's still not very prevalent. So it is especially good for you to be engaged with your elected officials.
Okay, well, anyone has something to say? This is time for him to go. Thank you for spending this time with us.
Well, thank you guys.
Mike.
Okay, so what do you think? What do you think Code for America should do? Or really good comments so far, by the way.
I think that there's a lack of a connection between the information coming out of the data and the policy which should be changing.
Yeah.
So even the most minor connection between whatever data is released to be able to inform policy and being able to sort that so that you're not overloaded with information to be able to change policy.
Yeah.
Nashville has a kind of a clever policy, which is if you publish the data on any department website, you must bring it to the centralized open data portal. And that's like a very simple statement. So it's just like, it means that you can find anything there in theory. They're way out sometimes. But
Another good example is blockchain is based off of something called Merkle trees. And Merkle trees were specifically used to synchronize databases across long distance. So if you were able to take the data, hash it, individually hash the rows, and be able to do similarity searches against multiple databases, you'd be able to, without exposing any private information, determine how much of that information is duplicate and slightly different.
So they'd have to be, wouldn't they have to still be controlled by the same domain?
Say that again?
Wouldn't they still have to be controlled by the same domain?
If you exported the Merkle trees from each domain, you could compare them separately.
I mean, I think, so I work in healthcare where we are constantly getting data from multiple other clients, right? And so something we have learned is the best way to get accurate, useful data is not to ask for something specific.
Right.
To say, give us the data you use and you understand, and answer our phone calls about how you use it and how you understand it. Anytime that we've ever asked, give us this data in this format, because they're not using that, they may make accidental mistakes, or there may be miscommunication where they say, oh, I thought when you said provider, you meant like the billing provider.
And it's a big assumption that they're actually using that data to inform their decisions. Like
Yes, that is a big assumption, but I think it's actually great if you can just dump it.
Yeah.
And then explain it.
And then
I think I want to say counter to that is one of the primary reasons people's public records requests are denied because they're not specific enough. So what you need to do is take several bites at the apple, say, give me all of your catalog of information, right? And then you say, well, give me now this. And now as you delve deeper into the data structures and the semantics of it all, now you can make a more precise records request. But in Ohio, they kill you every time because it's not specific enough. I mean, you can't just say, give me 2 years of all of your correspondence with X. right?
Why not?
Because the law says otherwise, they're on a wild goose chase and they don't quite know. They're spending way too much money in trying to find the data. It might not be correct, right? So
Well, you can't ask, but
you can
you
ask.
probably lose in court.
Well, not lose in court, but you're not going to get anywhere. That's yeah. So if you have an organization that's interested in working with you, fine, right?
Mhm.
But if you're saying I want the records on such and such and such, you got to be kind of specific on it. Yeah. So maybe you're having good luck. I don't know. But I just would advise against that. That's yeah. I don't mean to.
Yeah.
So that's sort of what the law says, and the way the agencies all the time deny it. Either it's not a public record or it's not specific enough. Yeah.
Yeah.
But maybe you're just lucky. I don't know.
No, I mean, it's the difference between if you have a good relationship and they're like, I don't know what format to publish this in, they're very nervous about it. What I'm advocating for is, actually, it's very easy for you just to publish what you have. So if that's open data approach.
It's open data.
As
yes.
opposed to
Okay.
a public record, which would
Right.
be.
Yeah, okay, now,
Yeah.
yeah, you're saying open data. You just, if you've got it, you're using it, and it's fairly clean, put it up there.
And don't reformat it, don't
Okay,
transform
yeah,
it,
just
don't
put it
try
up
to.
there, right? But if it gets to that adversary role, the only way you're gonna have the law backing you up is if you can be very specific in your requests. So, it's-
Okay.
right. So we need both of these, open data and public records requests to get that. Keep this going.
A lot of the discussion has been really interesting, but a little adversarial, you know, like if the agency doesn't want to or can, or, you know. We're from Charlottesville, Virginia, and Charlottesville just a year and a half ago started an open data portal, and this is how it is for a lot of small towns, either they've got like nothing, or maybe they're just beginning to think of the idea. For Charlottesville, small town, the people who are doing it are really well intentioned. They want to do a good job. They're not trying to hide anything or do anything. They just don't always know
I agree
how.
with you.
And we're also a super new brigade. And so my question is, what can we Code for Charlottesville do to help this?
Yeah, I think by and large, I think that's one of the sub motifs here is that a lot of these people really do want to help. Right? They just don't know how, and you can help them help you. Right? I'm just talking about those situations where you really do need the data, and they're not giving it to you. Right? You don't want to play that card until the last card, right? You don't want to go out and do that because you want to have a good relationship with government, right? CFA, right?
Yeah.
So this is sort of in CFA's turf. I don't know how you want to, position yourselves. Because now if you're working with a civic organizations that outside the government and you're asking for data, how are you then, right? Is that viewed as adversarial? Because you guys are scary to the government, right? Oftentimes when you go to government, you're scary. Who are these new people coming in? They want to work on our systems. So, huh?
I said, I'm not scared.
Right, yeah. So I'm downplaying the adversarial, but do know that it's in your back pocket if you need it.
Another approach to, that was mentioned in the Clear My Record group to doing policy is that, and I was talking about that you were including a form, including the tool. Anybody else on that one? Did I just?
It wasn't our group, or it wasn't Nashville, but another group, maybe Tulsa. The law included the form, like the statute included
Correct.
the
So
material.
another legislator and I have been talking at this house around healthcare, but in a situation where there's poor oversight, to include the mechanism for doing that oversight, which is a pretty simple online tool, with the proposed legislation. So a lot of those roadblocks are out of the way when you walk in the door. They say, here is how we can do this oversight, and here's the Swiss Army knife you can do that with, and it's open source, and it comes with the proposal. So we haven't actually done that yet. We're talking about it.
Somebody new, yeah.
Just out of curiosity, you mentioned that the courts have gotten more lenient on agencies when these cases get adversarial. What do you think that is?
Well, the courts are not themselves very interested in providing themselves.
As you said, attorneys.
Yeah. I don't know. I think a lot of this is. I think they're sort of the spirit of the moment, and over time it's kind of whittled down, right? I was just at a meeting Wednesday, and they were openly talking about how they could keep this out of the public domain and not a public record, so that they don't have to be recorded. Now, I wanted to work with them, so I soft pedaled that one. But yeah, I think there's just a general, I don't know why over time, I think it's viewed as being expansive and too much on agencies. Yeah. A lot of, and the courts have also recognized all kinds of examples that maybe not even clear in the law, but they've recognized or expanded loopholes to make it easier for agencies to say, no, they claim that exemption, I don't have to give it to you. Yeah. It's a good question.
So I was in the Clear My Case session in Portland. We're working on an expungement tool. We are not able to do the automatic clearing like California can. But to get to the data, we're dealing with a closed system, and I don't know why it's closed. This session has given me a reason to ask around and find that out. I suspect it's because maybe they're just not online with the public. It may be a local law, maybe more than I don't know yet, but this has given me sort of to ask that question. Could be.
Yeah.
For some reason, if you're a lawyer, you can, if you're not, you cannot.
Yeah, relationships, right? I think that's a theme that's been coming up in a couple of these sessions too, develop relationships with them. People who know them or with them themselves.
Right.
You could be trusted, or how can we work out something? You know, I always have to go to the law to say.
We got 4 minutes early.
Anybody, any other questions? It looks like there's one back here.
So I'm from Tulsa, Oklahoma, and in Oklahoma we have a really cool system where all the court cases are filed under one single system. And I work in a project specifically called CourtBot, and we're trying to have this be rolled out to other states or other cities, and we're finding out that in other states and other cities you have to pay to even access your court records. So what I'm trying to understand is, how do I help these other states and cities who don't have free access to the records to provide these services for what we can do for people who need to get to court, to leverage that here's another state that's already doing these things, and by doing that they're able to provide the service, right? How do we help the other state push their government to allow an exception or, you know, move their policy towards this other system?
Yeah, I mean, if an agency, and many of them do, depend on their revenue for collecting that, and you suddenly say, we want it for free, it becomes a difficult thing, right? I think it's long-term policy, right? Because if you're talking about funding and revenue, that's going to take a long time when you're taking somebody's money out. But that's where I think you have to work with the process.
Yeah, you have to get the champion in the legislature who says, no, you've already paid for this, and you have a right to it. And so let's do something about changing that law.
Yeah. Or finding
regulation that money machine is in place. They don't need to be there anymore.
Or there's a contracted service, I think was also mentioned, but I'll just reiterate it. There's a contract service, they've been hired to do the disbursement, but now how are they going to pull them out, because they've got to be paid, right? Typically that's poor planning, poor management on the part of government to do that. But I think it's a long-term policy thing. Yeah, you got to separate out the revenue from the data itself.
So, sorry, to follow up to that, so if we should be looking at that as a long policy change,
yes.
then while we're trying to provide this service, we should be prepared to have money set aside to get court cases. I would go the political route, because that might take you a little bit of time and money to do that.
Stay on the courts as much as you can.
Well, you want to feed them while you're trying to starve them too.
Go to the court of public opinion.
Yes, yeah, court of public opinion. And I think there's natural allies. I mean, this effort to get open down in Ohio reached the zenith, and we had change in administration, and now we got to start all the way up. But you have allies, right? I mean, you have the press. The press wants and needs open data. They spend all their time collecting data. If it were open, they could spend a lot more of their time actually doing writing the articles and whatnot. So there are natural allies here that you can form in the policy process. And I think that's one of the ideas that we had for this session, is to begin thinking about that. Right? Who are those allies, and how can you work with them?
I'm curious if you talk a little bit about what you see as the unintended consequences of open data. So what sort of data do you think you might think about not being able
Okay, so this is the mosaic problem that everybody knows about, right? So you could anonymize information, right? Take out all the personal identifying information. In fact, you don't want to put private information on an open data site, but you could triangulate if you have enough information of the right kind of information. Using AI, you can figure out who these people are. So that's an ongoing problem, and there's algorithms, the technologies that allow you to figure out how much information you can give out before they're able to triangulate and with a certain degree of confidence know that that's that person. So that's one intended consequence of that. But yeah, that's probably the only one I can think of because
it feels worth saying. Another thing consequence of the current system is that only people who have a profit interest in getting data about you can get your data, and it's incredible how much data they can get. Like in Nashville, like I can know everyone's water bills and whether they've paid them for the last 2 years, and that costs $800. So if I pay $800 and it's worth it to me to know whether or not you are delinquent on your bills for predatory lending or things like that, then I will spend $800.
that's a good question. I'll have to think about it more. I'm such a passionate advocate for it, but I have to try to think like, what are we going into this?
From Oklahoma.
Yeah.
Our OSCM network is basically a queryable page. It's not super easy to query, but you can put in somebody's name and start looking stuff up. And definitely one of the kind of unintended consequences is like you as a layperson going in, you might put in my name, and someone else with my name may have a record, and that may like color your thoughts on me. So it's kind of that like you're not going and like officially getting it from them. They're gonna like maybe find the right person, but now that you have the open data, you're finding stuff and you might be taking them wrong.
Yeah.
So with your anonymized data, that's not a problem. But like with the
Yeah, we found that with searching for records, people with similar names just spelled differently.
Yes.
It's easy to get confused.
Yeah, I'm sorry, go ahead. Another question?
To the earlier point about allies and like changing the state policies, ACLU will often fight for open data as a civil rights and social
The right to know.
issue.
Yeah.
Especially when it comes to criminal justice.
Yeah, the right to know is fundamental to being a citizen, right? It's the right to know is fundamental to the right to speech.
So partnering with like your state's ACLU would be a good path.
I have a question around that, like where does your right to know meet up with my right to be forgotten?
Yeah, well,
It's being discussed.
Somebody from here was just on one of the other, I heard about it on an NPR show, talking about that with this very issue in the state of Ohio. We were having a conversation.
Yeah,
There
it's
was
up
no
to the
good answer.
legislature. I'm sorry.
No.
Time's up. Okay, thank you.
Thank you for coming.